Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you to my channel. Thanks for finding me, thanks for joining me, and thank you for subscribing should you wish to, because I post every week on a Friday. I'm a rank amateur trying to grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia, either inside or outside, or not at all. And I don't have a greenhouse, much as I would love one, or any other equipment, really just me and them struggling to find a rhythm together. So if that sounds like your bag, hit subscribe. I post every week, as I said, and I would love you to come along on my amateur rambling journey. Which today takes us to South America and the heady highlands where you will find Brassias. Because today, plant lovers of the world observe, yes, not one, but two of my sort of Brassia types are in bloom, and I thought, well, I have made a video about this before, and this, but there's more to tell. Most notably, the huge amount of time difference between this one flowering for me a second time. Anyway, so here we are, plant lovers, a video about my Brassia type orchids, well, the two of them that are in bloom right now, and it is early-ish spring. Now, I don't really have many Brassias. I don't know why. It's one of those things, you know, you just have a bit of a block about certain types of orchids and think, nah, they're not going to work for me. It's too hard, too tricky. I don't have the right conditions. Well, learning more about this one, which is a hybrid, which we'll get to, made me realize so many Brassias are in fact cool and cold growing that I should really give them much more opportunity to join my gang. But we'll get to that. So firstly, let's talk names, shall we? It's always good to name and not shame. Now, this beauty here has a tag which says keiliana, ta-da. But in fact, according to Q now, it is a Brassia. So it's Brassia keiliana. And there's been lots of movement, nomenclature movement around the names of these types of orchids from one name to another. But it seems the powers that be are pretty much now settled on Brassia for this type. Anyway, Brassia keiliana, and it is a stunning orchid. I have got 3 spikes of incredible flowers. They've got these wonderful wispy whiskers to the flowers, which are, I would say, goodness, that's probably like 7 inches. That is a long flower from tip to toe. And what is more beautiful is there is the most delicious subtle fragrance, and it is literally like Chinese jasmine tea. So when you're in a Chinese restaurant and you have Chinese jasmine tea, it's that fragrance. So it's not jasmine, it's jasmine tea. That's what I can smell. That's where I'm at. Utterly, utterly beautiful. This one, no fragrance, but we'll get to that. And this one is found across the north of South America, so Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, across there. And from mountainous areas, but not super high altitude. So it's described as a cool to intermediate grower. So for me, not one that I would grow outside all year. I definitely keep this one inside all year to try and just not chill it too much in winter. But other Brassias, which we'll get to, I've realized can really take my chill outside all year. But let's get back to this. Now, in my video last year, I pointed out that I got a lot of crinkles from the leaf, and this is a plant that needs to have its moisture kept up, not one that you want to let dry out. And I promised in my video a year ago, I would try harder. Well, I did. I really, really focused on keeping this one moist, and still the crinkles, whatever. But perhaps more tragic, not really tragic, but sad and disappointing, is that this one has just been attacked. It's been attacked by scale, it's been attacked by aphids. Aphids and scale, scale and aphids, on, off, on, off, on, off. So it's constantly been sprayed and treated. So a lot of the leaves are in really terrible condition, but I don't know why, this one has just become a pest magnet. And I'm just looking on the back of this leaf and I can still see scale, which is annoying. So I will clean that off with an old toothbrush and rubbing alcohol. Now you can spray it. There's no great secret about dealing with scale, really. You just got to deal with it. If there's just 1 or 2, you can just crunch them off. But this one, I think, and it's just this leaf, because I have been assiduously treating this plant, so that's good. But a lot of the leaves just did not respond well to the oil treatment I was using for the scale. Probably because it was also sunny, so the leaves, I think, just got burnt with that oil on them. So the poor darling, it's not looking great, but despite all that, 3 spikes and they are in gorgeous condition, and the fragrance is delicious. So I promised last year to do better. Well, now this year I'm going to have to promise again to do better with you, Brassia keiliana. But that is not really the star of the show. The star of the show is this incredible orchid. Look at that. Look at the size of the flowers in comparison to its species friend. And the color, just sensational. Now, I bought this when it was in bloom 3 years ago, and I included it in a video, I think, then. And it was actually in that whole COVID period as well. So it's kind of one of those orchids that I certainly remember. And I bought it because it was in bloom and I'd never seen anything quite like it, and I loved it. Now, it never has flowered since. And I've kind of switch positions, but ultimately I found the best position for it in the conditions that I have, which is inside all year. It's at the bottom of the stairs, and I'll link my grow video here so you can see exactly where I mean. So it gets really beautiful indirect light basically all year, a little bit stronger in winter because the sun's a bit lower, and that window is north facing. So I'm in the southern hemisphere, that's where all the light comes from. If you're in the northern hemisphere, it will be a south facing window. So it gets really beautiful diffused light all year. Strong, great light. It's a great light for oncidiums, for example. All my oncidiums that are there bloom very well. But this baby just sulked for 3 years. And then, lo and behold, ta-da, ta-da, up it pings, this fabulous flower spike, and lots of growth. So I don't know. Now, I haven't changed anything. So I didn't repot it. I haven't changed anything about its care. I didn't change its watering regime or its feeding regime. It just decided to bloom for me. And I really hope it blooms every year from now on. This baby here, Brassia keiliana, flowered at exactly this time last year with 3 spikes, as beautiful. So this one, I would like it to be just as reliable. Now, it was a no ID when I bought it. It just said, I think actually the place I got it from always just says oncidium types, which it's not. It is a Brassia type. And I then found an image of it, and it was called Brassada Mivada. Ada being one of the types of name that used to be attached to this type of orchid, but now it is Brassada Mivada. So it's a hybrid between 2 species of Brassias, which are Brassia verrucosa, Brassia aurantiaca. Now, aurantiaca means orange flower, and verrucosa comes from the Latin meaning wart. Remember verrucas? No one ever talks about verrucas anymore, but when I was a kid at school in England, we always had to have verruca baths before we got into the swimming pool. Anyway, it's a little wart. Yum. So apparently Brassia verrucosa has little wart-like tips, bits on the lip of the flower. So this is a hybrid between those 2 species, and then various forms thereon to bring us this baby, which was produced in about 1997, I think. And oh, actually, I'm lying. There is a hint of the same kind of jasmine tea fragrance as our species friend here. But what I love about the flower was the color, the size, and the wonderful sort of browny spots on this fantastic golden background. The most beautiful flower, really striking, very sculptural, and really large, which is what you want generally in a hybrid bloom. It's generally bigger or better color or stripy or better fragrance or more vigorous. That's what hybridization is all about. And this one certainly fits that bill. But the interesting thing is, and this is the great thing about making these videos and researching, is that in looking at both of those ancestor species, I realized they are both cool and one of them cold growing, which means I could grow them outside all year under cover in my conditions. So Brassia verrucosa, Brassia aurantiaca are now on my want list because the aurantiaca one is such a really strong, beautiful orange and has a very different shaped flower, but an incredibly strong orange. So I'm looking forward to trying to find that. I'm sure I can, because it seems to be very much an orchid that will do very well in Melbourne. So those 2 are now on my list officially. I also have a Brassia rex, which I bought as a rather sad little division actually, and it's just getting its mojo on, and I decided after having it here, there and everywhere just to put it outside all year. It's one of those things I thought, you know what, giving up on you baby, survive or don't, but it's kind of love life outside. So I'm happy to see that that one is growing, and hopefully we'll get to a stage where it can bloom, but I'm really happy that this one has bloomed. Now, it's incredibly vigorous, really strong leaf growth and sort of rhizomous growth. So it kind of has the habit, I guess, in terms of its structure of an oncidium. So you have your bulb, your two leaves, and the flower comes out of that juncture between the pseudobulb and the leaf, which I'll show you. But what you can see from this one is its real sort of rambling gait and all of those roots outside of the pot. Look at that, direction-wise, it's yearning for the light, as we all are. But sometimes with an orchid like that, it can be quite tricky to pot it, and you might think, well, maybe something's wrong, or maybe I'm not giving it the right conditions. So I thought I'd turn to an expert book just to see if I could find any info about the growing habits of these. Enter Exhibit A, Growing Orchids by J.N. Rentoul. Now this is a series of 4 books. This is book 2, which is Cattleyas and Other Epiphytes. And I bought all 4 in a second-hand shop, which was brilliant. They were published in 1985. Obviously, some of the nomenclature has changed, as it does. But in fact, these are all Brassias in this book, and then they went through changes, and now they're back. So it's kind of back to the future for this book. But that aside, it's written by someone who, looking at the author photo, was a mature gentleman in 1985, so lots of years of growing experience here in Australia. But nonetheless, I think just good general advice. And I was curious to see, A, if Brassia were in these 4 volumes, and they are, and B, what he might say. And 1 or 2 things just struck me. So we just mentioned Brassia verrucosa, which is one of the 2 species ancestors of this Brassada Mivada hybrid. And Mr. Rentoul says of verrucosa, native to Mexico and Guatemala, was introduced to English growers about 1840. Of all the Brassias, it perhaps could lay claim to the quality of quote-unquote cool growing. Which means, cool growing in the Australian context means it can grow in Melbourne, outside without any heat, but undercover, so protection from the winter rain. But it can take our winter nighttime minimums. Which is leading me to think that this hybrid can as well. Now, I just assumed it was a warmer grower, so I've been very careful with it. But maybe, plant lovers, and given the size of it, maybe it's going to do better outside for me. So I have to see if I'm ready to make that move with this one. Okay, so let's now talk about the growing habit. You see, so much of that plant is outside of the pot, which, depending on the type of orchid, but you can sometimes see it as a problem. Well, it's certainly a problem if you're trying to pot them, because how do you contain that? But let's just see what he says here. Brassias seem to flower best when some of the root system is aerial, so there is no need to worry about the roots growing out of the potting material, which is exactly what is happening with this baby. So as we're getting the new growths, it's outside the pot, and it's certainly outside the potting material, and we have all of these aerial roots. Now, if I was growing this outside, I would be able to keep it a whole lot moister, particularly those aerial roots, because I would literally be spraying it with a hose. So it would be easier for me to look after this outside. And now that I think it can take those temperatures, I think when we move, that great mythic future that I'm looking forward to, when we move, I might make this, experiment with it and try it as an outdoor orchid. Of course, the problem is, you rarely see it, so if I do kill it, which happens, I might not be able to replace it. So I don't know. I have to see if I've got the courage of my convictions to see if this one can take it outside. But I feel, given Brassia rex is outside and loving life, these 2 ancestor species are both cool, cold growing, it should thrive. So in terms of other sort of care and conditions, bright indirect light, like oncidiums, slightly cooler temperatures, not dissimilar to many oncidiums, not something I let dry out completely, but in winter, certainly I'm giving it a lot less water than in summer, obviously, although Brassia keiliana, this little baby here, does like water and doesn't like to dry out, so I've really tried to keep the liquid up to that. Hasn't really worked. But this one I feel a little tougher and can take a little bit more drying in winter than its species friend. And then as the weather warms up, keeping it moister and certainly increasing the frequency of watering. And then in spring, which is now, I am about to do my big spring task, which is a topical application of a slow release fertilizer. You can either use one generically for flowering plants or an orchid specific one. And then throughout the growing season, I do liquid fertilize with a little bit of either an orchid-focused liquid fertilizer or a generic flowering plant one, or a tonic, which is more of a seaweed-based or worm juice-based kind of liquid, and I dial all of those down dilution-wise to about 1/8, 1/10 of the recommended dose, just to keep them lean, keep them mean, keep them keen. So I think, plant lovers, that is it. I'm just thrilled that Brassia, I was going to call it Brassada, but Brassada Mivada has decided to bloom for me after a 3-year sabbatical, and that Brassia keiliana is proving to be one of those super reliable orchids. And don't you love that? Now, it's a species, so it only flowers once a year. Most species orchids do tend to flower once. Not sure about this. I would imagine perhaps as new growths mature, it might choose to flower randomly. I bought this, when I bought it, it was the month of January, which is midsummer here in Australia, and it was in bloom. Now it is September, so it's early spring, and mine is in bloom now. So a bit of time difference there, which I would think perhaps is more related to the pseudobulbs maturing and the flower being initiated, perhaps. So we might see that this could bloom more than once a year. So there we are, plant lovers. I've got a bit of homework. I've got to do some more descaling on Brassia keiliana here. I'm going to really try and again keep the moisture up. I don't know, you know, some things just have crinkly leaves. And then this one, perhaps I'll be brave enough to try it outside all year. Maybe starting just once the weather warms up a little bit more, I might try it outside. It'll be much easier for me to maintain it, I think. But other than that, I'm really thinking I need to try and get a couple more of those Brassias, some of those 2 species perhaps, and maybe hybrids therein again, just to see if they will cope outside all year here. I think they should. Anyway, I'm very excited. Beautiful fragrance of Chinese jasmine tea. So plant lovers, I hope wherever you are, your Brassias are treating you well. And I look very much forward to seeing you next week with whatever glorious adventure we may be on, amateurish as it will be. Nonetheless, do hit subscribe if you want to know what that will be. And I look forward to seeing you next week.